Eswar, why do you think China wins round one?
What China has given isn't that much, actually. It's going to buy more stuff from the U.S., and they would have bought this from other markets anyway, so it's just a matter of a small diversion. The amount is not going to be very large or affect the U.S. bilateral trade deficit with China in a durable way. But some of the changes that the Trump administration got from China, such as a better intellectual property rights protection regime, is actually going to be good for China in the long run. They want to be an innovation-led economy, and they need a better intellectual property rights protection regime. So a better IP regime is good for China. Whether they will enforce it in a way that does not once again advantage their domestic firms remains to be seen. And that's where China has been very clever at using its previous trade commitments to favor its own companies. Similarly, the agreement to not allow its currency to depreciate actually works well for China. They don't want the currency to depreciate too much and have capital flowing out. So making that guarantee in public actually gives them currency stability, which they're happy about.
Tony, maybe the president's right. Maybe this should have been done 20 years ago. And in the meantime, they've stolen enough to a degree where they can start to be self-reliant.
Yeah, maybe. Look, Eswar makes a really excellent point on some of these structural reforms. They are in China's interest and should have been doing them a long time ago. And I think a couple successive administrations have been trying to convince them of that. So that's why when I look at like some of the elements of this agreement, I think those kinds of reforms are basically good. The continued talking is basically good. We're going to move on to more things. Winners and losers. I don't know that it was worth all of this effort to get to where we are, but I do like the direction. The things that really concern me, though, are some of these sort of directives on, on the currency, for example, and on the sort of forced purchases of these products. What we really want is for China to be more of a market economy, and the administration is putting in structures that encourage them to be more of a managed economy, and that's not really where we're going to go for the long term. But I hope that, I want to be optimistic about future discussions in this.
Eswar, I wonder what you think about financial services aspect of this deal. I mean, some of the stipulations that were laid out in detail yesterday honestly go back to when China entered the WTO, some of the same types of promises that we see going back 25 years that have yet to be fulfilled. Why would now be different?
As Mr. Fratto correctly pointed out, this is not to be discounted. It is good that American and other financial services firms, insurers, banking firms, and so on, can enter the Chinese market, which is a very large growing market, which certainly could use foreign competition. But the interesting thing is that China is fulfilling a commitment, as you said, that it made a very long time ago, now at a time that suits it. Because at this point, Chinese financial firms, Chinese insurers can stand on their own and compete with foreign firms. And now the foreign competition is actually going to serve a very useful purpose in terms of pushing forward financial market reforms, in terms of creating better competition in China. So again, China comes out a winner. Not that the U.S. is going to come out a loser, but China has done this reform at a time that suits it on its own terms.
Eswar, I'm curious now that we can look back, at least now that we have a trade deal here. TPP. Trans-Pacific Partnership. Very much unclear it ever would have passed the Congress, but of course the Trump administration withdrew from it immediately. Do you think that would have been a better deal to contain China and sort of help the U.S. than the trade deal we've got right now with the country?
Certainly, that would have had a much better effect in terms of helping the U.S. Write the rules of international trade. The concern right now is that with China creating a lot of bilateral and multilateral deals where it gets to be the key partner that can dictate the terms of those deals, with the U.S. backing off from the WTO, which is something that most other countries still want to keep viable, China has a bigger role. So the U.S., through its actions, has basically given itself less influence in terms of this multilateral process. It may have gotten some small wins from China, but in terms of the broader picture, the U.S. withdrawal from the global trading system, or at least the notion of that, is not helping the U.S. cause.
Tony, I wonder what you think phase 2 negotiations could potentially look like or entail, especially given the fact that one of the other big pieces of trade news this week was the U.S., the EU, and Japan coming out and basically looking for reforms around state subsidies in the WTO.
Yeah, I would have loved to have seen those discussions start 2 years ago. I mean, to Eswar's point about, whether it's TPP or other ways to link arm with allies to present a more unified front with China. It would have been better to start that earlier, but I'm glad that they're starting it now, and that our other major trading partners, Europe and Japan, are starting those discussions. So I hope that that's what we see in phase two, and that we come around to that way of thinking. Early in the Trump administration, there was this rejection of the economic dialogue with China. Economic dialogue is now back on the table with China. They're going to restart those talks. There was a rejection of multilateralism. Now we're looking at other multilateral solutions to try to present a united front. Those are good things, and we need to see more of that.
Yeah, and Eswar, one final question to Tony's point about strategic focus. Are we back in the Hank Paulson dialogue era? Are we back in the China's open for business and endless opportunity with a billion people? Or are we still in their supply chain must be broken, we're going to distance ourselves, digital Cold War, Huawei, and all of that? I mean, the two sides are operating simultaneously.
It's good that we have a phase one deal. It means a little less uncertainty. It means a little less escalation of tensions. But the fundamental uncertainties that affect American importers, that affect American businesses who are thinking about selling into the Chinese market, using China as part of their supply chains, all of those uncertainties remain on the table, and China gets to make the big changes on its own terms. So phase two is going to be a very difficult issue. China isn't going to be happy about trying to change the structure of its economy. So I think the fundamental uncertainty is going to remain, and China is going to continue with its broader set of policies, and this phase one deal won't have much of an effect on that.